Well, thank you, Gordon. Good morning, everybody. I'm Merv Coates. I'm from Australia originally, but been here a long time now with my good wife, my lovely wife, Adi, Kiwi. And Gordon's given us a beautiful introduction this morning to our topic, because one of the exciting things that is happening at Global at the moment is that people are having babies. The most recent, of course, was Irene and Philip with baby Samuel. Not here today, I presume. He's 11 days old. So congratulations to them anyway. And so it's not just the Prime Minister who's having babies at the moment. And I think it's very valuable for us from time to time to think carefully about what the Bible teaches about being Christian parents, and that's what we're going to be doing today. And I want to ask this question. It'll be on the screen. How can global parents and all of us hand on a spiritual heritage to our children? And I want to share with you 5 keys that I think will make a really big difference. Now, none of us are perfect parents, including Adi and me, but God has shown us some things over the years that have helped us as parents and now as grandparents. And even if you're not yet a parent, many of you someday will be parents. And even now, I was talking to Pastor Mike about this, and he said he wants us to think of ourselves, if we don't have children yet, as like spiritual aunts and uncles, because we all have an influence on the children who are part of our fellowship, right? Is that true? And isn't it lovely to see the children around here just now and over here earlier on this morning? It was beautiful. And one of the things we're going to do today is, after the message and then after we have our discussions, and then we're going to get all the parents and the children up the front here, and we're going to have prayers of blessing for you, your families, and so on. So that'll be something to look forward to at the end of the service. Now, to help you understand this idea of handing on a spiritual heritage, I want to tell you a story that I told some of you at Global Camp last year, but it is very, very relevant to today's topic. And I once received a letter from my father in Australia, and he was telling me about a young girl called Amelia Phyllis Rose. And she came to Australia with her family way, way back in the 1880s, long time ago. And when she was still only 16 years of age, her mother died. And it fell on her shoulders to look after the whole family of 6 children who were all younger than her. Her father, he wasn't really much help. He provided some food on the table, but he was a very tough man. He traded horses, he had a bad temper, and he also drank far too much. So anyway, this young girl, Amelia, nobody in this family believed in God or followed God, but she met a lady over the back fence. And this woman, a very kind Christian woman, taught her about Jesus and about a God who loved her and had a purpose for her life. And she believed, and she trusted Jesus. And things started to change for her, but as soon as her father knew about this, he was very angry. He threw her out of the house, told her not to come back. But he couldn't look after the children. So he said, please, Amelia, come back and look after the children. The same thing happened when she was baptised sometime later, thrown out of the house. But he invited her back. Now, this man, as I said, was quite violent, and his bad temper in the end was his downfall, because one day, about 1900, he was treating his horses very badly, and one of them bolted and threw him from his wagon, and the wagon ran over him, and he was killed. But that's not the main point of the story. That true story really got me thinking when I read about it, when my father sent me that letter, because Amelia was my grandmother. And later on, she married, she raised 7 Christian children, one of whom was my father. Most of his children, most of those uncles and aunts' children, my cousins, most of them have become followers of Jesus. Most of our children, and now my grandchildren, are following Jesus. Not all of them, not all the cousins, but I trace that back in God's mercy to that woman, Amelia. She handed on to us a heritage. Now, each of us had to come to Jesus personally. The fact that my grandmother was a believer in Jesus did not make me a Christian, right? When I was 19, made a definite surrender of my life to Jesus myself, and that was necessary for any of the others who wanted to be believers as well. But the point was that Amelia handed on to us a heritage, an opportunity for us to know God as she knew God, and I am so thankful to God for Amelia. 16-year-old girl, stood strong against opposition. Now, as I tell that story, I fully realise that many people here today will not have received a heritage like that. And maybe, so far as you know, you're the only person in a number of generations, even in your family, who have learnt about Jesus and who know of a God who loves them and who sent Jesus to show us how to live and to eventually sacrifice his life for us. Yet, the good news has come to you. You've heard the message of Jesus. You've had the opportunity, and today I think it's a good opportunity for us to say thank you, God, for the people that you used to bring us a heritage. They may not have been in our family, but they've loved us, they've nurtured us, they've explained the gospel of Jesus to us, and we are thankful for those people. But the other thing I want to say today is I want to encourage you to recognise your own strategic role as maybe the first follower of Jesus in some generations within your own family. You see, you can be the new runner, like in a relay race. One person hands the baton to the next, and so on. You can be the first runner in a whole new sequence of generations that learn about Jesus. That's exciting. In a sense, you can change history. You see, Amelia changed history in a certain way, didn't she? Because so many people had the direction of their whole life changed because of her commitment to follow Jesus. So I encourage you today to recognise that God's going to use you, if you do follow him, to bless many other people, hand on a spiritual heritage. So how do we do that? How do we, as parents, grandparents, and also as influencers, spiritual, what was the term I used earlier? Spiritual, that Mike used. Well, I can't remember the term he used. But anyway, people that can have an influence on other children in our fellowship. To understand it, I want us to read some of the first instructions in the Bible that God gives to parents. Now, these are the words of Moses, way back in Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 following. And although it is addressed to a very ancient people, thousands of years ago now, there are principles here that are timeless and they are really relevant to us today. So how about we read this scripture together under the heading, What is God's Purpose for Families? Please read together. Listen, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. And you must commit yourself wholeheartedly to these commands that I am giving you today. Repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you are at home and when you are on the road, when you are going to bed and when you are getting up. So the first thing we notice here is that the blessings of life with God are meant to be handed on from one generation to another. This is the way God has planned it. Parents to children to grandchildren and so on. So what is the purpose of this? Back in verse 2, it's not on the screen, but back in verse 2, it says this: so that you, your children, and their children after them might respect or reverence the Lord. One generation after another, reverencing God, showing him the greatest respect and honour. So how do we do that? I want to offer 5 keys for handing on a spiritual heritage, and I hope these will help you today. And the first one is this: be the kind of person that you want your children to become. Be the kind of person you want your children to become. Because any truth is conveyed most effectively when the teacher models what they are teaching. And this is especially true in Christian families. So in verse 5, before God instructs us about guiding our children, look what he says. He says, you, not first your children, but you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. And these commands which I give you today are to be upon your hearts. That is to say, if you are to be effective in handing a spiritual heritage to your children, you have to be first sure that God is centre of life for you. Your ambitions, your hopes, the way you live life, your plans. You must model the way of life that you want to see in your children as they grow up. So pay attention to your own life, to my own life. Otherwise, we have nothing to hand on, do we, to our children? It was written, of several characters in the Old Testament. He or she walked in the ways of their father. It's a whole list of people. It says this person, they walked in the ways of their father. It's very interesting. Now, in some cases, it was really good that they walked in the ways of their father. In some cases, it was horrible. Now, here's a question for fathers. Will you be glad if your children walk in your ways? If they become like you, if they have your character, your patience, your kindness, your prayerfulness, your ability to admit your weaknesses, will you be glad if your children walk in your ways? It's quite challenging. So much of what we teach our children also is taught subconsciously. Not just in words, but taught as our children observe us, right? Let me read a really neat little poem I came across. It's written from a child's point of view, and it's called When You Thought I Wasn't Looking. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you hang my first painting on the refrigerator, and I wanted to paint another one. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you help an injured puppy, and I thought it was good to be kind to animals. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you make my favourite cake for me, and I knew that little things are special things. When you thought I wasn't looking, I heard you say a prayer, and I believed there is a God I can always talk to. When you thought I wasn't looking, I felt you kiss me goodnight, and I felt loved. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw tears come from your eyes, and I learned that sometimes things hurt, but it's okay to cry. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw that you cared for people in trouble, and I wanted to care like you. When you thought I wasn't looking, I did look, and I wanted to say thank you for all the things I saw when you thought I wasn't looking. You like that? If you want a copy of that, you can ask me afterwards. The second principle is bring God into your everyday conversations. Verse 7 of Deuteronomy 6 says, impress these things on your children. Talk about these things when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Now, if you think about that verse, you'll see that it's a description of the normal activities of life. And many parents tell me that the most helpful discussions they have with their children about God and Jesus and Christian things are in the ordinary, relaxed settings of normal everyday life, travelling somewhere in the car. Or over a meal table, somebody raises an issue about bullying at school, or being hurt by something somebody said, or a teacher not understanding them, or something like this. Similar things happen at bedtime, don't they, when you tuck your kids in. I know sometimes they're just buying time because they don't want to go to sleep. But bedtime is a great time when children open up, not just about the bad stuff that's happened or the difficult things, but the things they are excited about and looking forward to. These are precious times. Now, a key thing for parents, especially as your children start to get older, into teenage years, this becomes especially important. And that is that you need to be open about what God is doing in your own life. They need to see how faith works for us in our ups and downs, and even in the times when say, our prayers don't seem to be answered in the way we hoped they would. They need to see how we handle that. And it's so good when we have this kind of relationship with children. You know, these days, Adi and I go to our children for spiritual advice. Yeah, they've got a lot of wisdom. And one other thing, the way we bring God into these conversations with children will depend on their age and their personalities and their openness to God or not. So we need to pray for wisdom, don't we? Because all children are different. And so that's one reason why we need to pray for each other. So the key thing, I believe, is to start as early as possible in the child's life. One of our children is a children's pastor in a Baptist church, and she's had some church parents say to her with tears in their eyes, we so much wish that we had started praying with our children earlier in life, because we missed the opportunity for them to live this way. And now they're much harder. They're not interested. I asked some mothers and fathers how they encourage discussion about God in their families. And some of them said they go to a Christian bookshop like Manna or Bamboo, and I recommend this in Dominion Road, and they look at and buy some of the brilliant books and DVDs that are available, excellent youth Bibles, children's storybook Bible, and they have amazing Christian biographies, some of them about young people and others who lived for God. So take a trip there one weekend to one of these Christian bookshops and just spend an hour fossicking around. And I believe that money that is spent on resources like that to have in your family, and say for you to watch with kids and to read with kids, is a brilliant investment. The other thing is I want to recommend a couple of very cool apps. Take a look, for instance, at the Bible app for kids and the Superbook, very, very popular. Hundreds of thousands of people are watching that at the moment. Our grandchildren just are addicted to it. A good sort of addiction, I think that. Another one called Guardians of Ancorn. These are marvellous. Now, the third key is this. Pray for and with your children and teach them to to pray. There's actually 3 things there. I was talking with a friend of ours who had a very hard life. He was, in fact, a recovering alcoholic. But he committed his life to Jesus. His life was completely changed by God. But he was trying to bring up 2 teenage boys by himself. And it was hard going. Life wasn't easy. And this friend of mine, he didn't have much money at all. And we were talking, one day he heard people talking about handing on a heritage to children. He knew he had no money to hand on to them. He said, he was very thoughtful, and he said this. He said, at the end of my life, I will have very little by way of money or possessions to hand on to my children. But then he said this, there is one heritage which no one can stop me giving my children. The heritage of a father who prays for his children every day of their life. And then that's priceless. To give that to your children is priceless. It's more than money. It impressed me so much. The best way to love your children is to pray for them regularly. It's not the only way, but it's the best way. It's the beginning way. Now, the second half of this 3rd key is also important, and that is teach them to pray. As soon as they can talk, I believe we want our children to start relating to God because He is as real as you are. And they will learn that best when they're young. I love hearing kids pray. I learn from them because their prayers are straight from the heart, even though they're quite funny sometimes. I love these ones. Joyce said this, Dear God, thank you for the baby brother, but what I really asked for was a puppy. Another one said, Dear God, this is Tommy. He says, Dear God, I want to be just like you when I'm your age. And then he says, okay, ? Dear God, I think about you sometimes even when I'm not praying. Now that's good. That's great. That's Elliot. And I saw this little paper on the wall of our 7-year-old grandchild, Summer, in her bedroom. And she'd written, she writes prayers and she puts them on the wall. That's her prayer wall. And this one says, Dear God, I love you further than to the moon and back. I want to get to know you better. I want to trust you more. Please help me. Gorgeous. So start early in life encouraging your children to pray about everything, about friends, people in need, as well as their own life. We notice how one of our daughters, Helena, prays with her kids like this in every situation. On the way to school, every day on the way to school, they pray. And for instance, God, please help Summer's friend's mother is in hospital and please help her. When they go to visit friends, they pray, God, help us to show your love to our friends. Great little prayer. And they celebrate when good things happen. They're always saying thank you. This is good to get our kids to do this. Back to Deuteronomy again, several times in Deuteronomy, Moses says, remember, do not forget the way the Lord your God has brought you and be thankful. In those olden days, this is in the next book after Deuteronomy, Joshua, they would set up a pile of rocks. When they had something to celebrate that God had done, that they would put a big pile of rocks up. And the idea was that the children would say, Mummy, Daddy, what are those rocks doing there? And this was an opportunity for them to remember what God had done in some deliverance or some brilliant answers to prayer and so on. And just to bring that into today, one thing we love doing every birthday of our grandchildren and at the end of the year as well, to get some photos of their life that year, put them on a PowerPoint and talk about what's happened that year. Talk about ways that God has done things that they're thankful for. And then we get other members of the family to thank God for those things and for those children and to bless those children. So that's something that I suggest is really worth making a family tradition. Heidi and I just love those celebrations. Fourthly, involve your family in the lives of those less fortunate. Now, sometimes we act wrongly as if God's main purpose in life for us is to make us comfortable and happy. But actually, the Bible goes way, way beyond that. Because the Bible says God wants to use us and our families to bless other people. You know that? That's his purpose for your family, not just to make life good for you and to help other people to know him as well. So we don't want our children to grow up all about me, do we? We want them from an early age to start thinking about the needs of others, both people here and people overseas. Again, in Deuteronomy chapter 15 this time, Moses urges God's people to care for others who are struggling physically and spiritually. He says, "Do not be hard-hearted toward needy people. Help them generously, and if you do, the Lord your God will bless you in everything you do." So every Christian family should pray, "God, please show us how you want us to help others as a family with the resources you've given us, including our home." Now, for the final way of handing on a spiritual heritage, this time we turn to the New Testament, many hundreds of years later than Deuteronomy. And in Ephesians and in 1 Thessalonians, the Apostle Paul shows us that we need to encourage what is good in our children, not just focus on what needs improvement. The Apostle Paul says this, "Fathers, do not exasperate children." The new translation is, "Do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the nurture and instruction of the Lord." My children used to quote that at me. "Dad, do not exasperate your children. Bible says." So I didn't have an answer to that one, except try not to exasperate them. So this means do not drive them up the wall with criticism and angry words. Now in 1 Thessalonians, we see how Paul describes the role of parents. He says, "We dealt with you, each of you, as a father deals with his own children." Note this, encouraging. See that? Comforting and urging you to live lives worthy of God who calls you into his kingdom and glory. So notice the positive ways in which we are to relate there. Now I read some research, and it was a large group of young people were asked to write an answer to this question: what is the most positive thing your parents have done that you will always remember? I wonder how you'd answer that. Here are some of the children's responses. "My mum and dad believe in me," one wrote. "My mum and dad take time to do stuff with me. They tell me I love you a lot, or you're a great kid, or I'm proud of you. They understand that I can't be perfect at everything." Interesting one. "They tell me what God is doing in their lives, and they even ask what I think." You know, it's so important, isn't it, to be encouraging. And other research shows that children who feel a strong emotional attachment to their parents are far more likely to take on their parents' beliefs and values. It's never guaranteed, but they're far more likely. So there are 5 ways for us to think about ways that we can hand on a spiritual heritage to our next generation. So, question is this: will you, as parents and as spiritual aunties and uncles, that was the term I was looking for earlier from Mike, spiritual aunties and uncles, join God in what he wants to do through you now? This is an amazing privilege, and God will help you. Later on, we're going to have a discussion time, and then after our discussion, which is about all these things, so you can express what you're thinking and feeling and responding, then we're going to get all of our parents up here. Some of them are coming up from downstairs as well, or from the children's ministry, and children as well, and we're going to have a couple of prayers of blessing. But for now, let's just think about what's been said and what the scriptures have said to us, what God has said to your heart today, and have a great discussion. God bless you. Thank you.